Good morning, my name is Stephan Greene. It is likely you've heard news about the Russian invasion of Ukraine within the past couple months, as the consequences of said invasion put countries and their governments all around the world in a state of unrest. Today, we're going to delve into the events and consequences of this invasion and possibly establish a plausible solution that may end the conflict once and for all. Before we do that, let's recap and take a good look at what caused Russia to invade Ukraine. In February of 2014, Ukrainian Crimea was annexed by Russia with intention of providing ports in the Black Sea and providing international trade in the country. The people of Ukraine, of course, didn't like that, so by September of that year, a separatist rebellion has started in the Ukrainian Donbas region directly bordering Russia. The separatists essentially wanted Russia to give Crimea back and remove all Russians from the region of Donbas, which there was a majority of Russian population there. In an effort to prevent further violence, in February of 2015, representatives of Ukraine, Russia, and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, known as OSCE, met in Minsk, Belarus to sign a ceasefire agreement which would promise to stop all military action in Donbass and essentially prevent Ukraine from getting more international military bases on its territory. In an effort to prevent further violence, in February of 2015, representatives of Ukraine, Russia, and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, known as OSCE, met in Minsk, Belarus, to sign a ceasefire agreement which would promise to stop all military action in the Donbas region, offer pardon or amnesty for all fighters, and essentially prevent Ukraine from deploying any sort of military bases on its territory in the future. However, as years went on, none of the promises of the Minsk Protocol or agreement were ever implemented. The violence continued until in February of 2022, Putin published a live speech on national TV recognizing the independence of the Donbas region, separating it from Ukraine, and announcing a special military operation in Ukraine to eliminate all international bases disguised as NATO missions. As a reaction to that speech and the events that followed, members of the UN throughout the world immediately started applying sanctions on the Russian economy and political figures in an effort to prevent further conflict. However, no further action was taken by members of the UN condemning Russia's invasion. NATO refused to send military units to Ukraine, and while women and children were able to evacuate to neighboring countries including Russia, men of fighting age, which is 15 to 45, were not allowed to leave the country and were encouraged to fight. They were given weapons out on the streets for defensive and offensive purposes. All international flights in Ukraine were cancelled, and UK published a warning to its citizens in Ukraine to leave the country immediately. Now, to understand why no further action was taken by these countries, let's look at the international relations theory of the balance of power, which is defined by Merriam-Webster Dictionary as an equilibrium of power sufficient to discourage or prevent one nation or party from imposing its will on or interfering with the interest of another. The balance of power has 6 strategies, one of which is limited retaliation. Nations who are attacked by other nations should retaliate only to the extent necessary to prevent their own sovereignty and safety. So, if, say, your neighboring country, decides to cut off their gas supply to you, you can't just go and nuke them. You can only respond with the equivalent amount of force to that aggression. Now that we've established why these countries could not punish Russia with anything other than sanctions, let's look at exactly what they did. According to Bloomberg, working in unison, Western governments have turned Russia into the most sanctioned nation in the world and sent their economy tumbling. The hope is that by crumbling Russia's economy, it will persuade Vladimir Putin to end his war in Ukraine. The estimates are that the GDP of Russia is going to contract by 30% immediately, which is the equivalent of the Great Depression that took place in America. So the goal was essentially to draw Russia's attention away from Ukraine and focus it on fixing its own economy and getting back on its feet. The sanctions included a ban on export of oil and gas, $600 billion of international assets frozen, major Russian banks disconnected from the international system of payments called SWIFT, cutting off Russian broadcasters from European Union countries on cable, satellite, and internet. UK stopped sale of visas to Russian citizens, and over 1,000 companies either suspended their services in Russia or withdrawn altogether. As we can see on this graph, these sanctions worked and worked pretty well, as the Russian ruble went up from 80 rubles per dollar to around 130 rubles per dollar. On this graph, the higher the line is, the worse it is for Russian economy. However, Russia did not turn the other cheek and decided to employ the strategy, don't bite the hand that feeds you. They immediately banned export of over 200 products from Russia, including medical supplies, agricultural supplies, wheat and grains, industrial metals, timber and timber products, and threatened to discontinue all supply of energy to the European Union. As a result, Russia managed to stabilize its currency, and it actually is in a better state now than it was 2 months ago. While the damage cannot be undone, we can learn from mistakes of the past and fix the conflict in the present. We can do so by re-establishing the Minsk Agreement, which means both sides would cease fire, withdraw all heavy weapons, pardon and amnesty for fighters. The states of Ukraine and Russia would be monitored by OSCE, and Russia would have to recover its socio-economic ties, which means removing sanctions and continuing trade. In addition to that, Ukraine should make a decision on whether or not it would join NATO. As goes for Donetsk, it should either be recovered back to Ukraine and Russian citizens in the region relocated to either different parts of Ukraine or Russia with proper accommodations provided, or Donetsk should be recognized as a sovereign independent state or its own government, with providing it temporary financial and material aid to get it up on its legs, and later establishing socio-economic ties between Donetsk and other countries. My name is Stephan Greene. Thank you for listening.